No one paid any mind to the woman seated in row 15. Her appearance was unremarkable, with her aged clothing and scuffed sneakers. The other travelers hardly registered her presence. Yet, when the aircraft's navigation systems failed completely, she rose from her seat without a word and ended up saving 298 souls. The journey from Dubai to London was meant to be a standard affair. Flight BA 847 was filled with 298 individuals, a mix of corporate travelers and vacationers returning from their travels in the Middle East. In row 15, seat C, was a woman who seemed out of place in the luxurious cabin. Her name was Alara Vance, though no one took the time to find out. She was dressed in a plain gray sweater that had clearly seen better times, faded denim with a small tear by the knee, and worn-out sneakers that made a faint squeaking noise as she moved. Her dark hair was tied back into a loose ponytail, and her only luggage was a small backpack that looked as if it had been around the globe more than once. Her fellow passengers were oblivious to her. They were absorbed in their own worlds, glued to their phones or deep in important discussions about market trends and corporate mergers. In seat 15A sat Julian Croft, a prosperous London businessman. His gold watch flashed in the cabin light with every gesture, and his Italian leather footwear was likely worth more than a month's salary for most people. He cast a single glance at Alara as she took her seat, his gaze sweeping over her inexpensive attire and old bag. He let out a soft noise of disdain before turning his attention back to his laptop. They must be upgrading people from economy, he commented to his assistant in 15B, speaking just loudly enough for Alara to overhear. The standards are certainly slipping. In the row directly behind, Chloe Daniels, a fashion influencer with immaculate blonde hair and a designer purse, was busy snapping selfies for her social media followers. She caught sight of Alara and murmured to her companion, "Take a look at that woman ahead of us. Does she not realize this is business class? The flight attendants should be informed." Alara heard it all but remained silent. She simply took out a small, weathered notebook and started to read, her fingers tracing over lines of what appeared to be technical diagrams and complex equations. The flight attendant, a young man named Leo, was keen to cater to the high-paying passengers. He had picked up on the whispers and complaints regarding Alara but was uncertain how to proceed. Her ticket was legitimate, yet she did not fit the profile of their typical business-class clientele. Leo said, approaching Alara with a strained smile. "I'll need to re-verify your boarding pass." Alara looked up with a calm expression and handed him the pass without a word. Leo examined it thoroughly, searching for any discrepancy, but it was all correct. He returned it with a slight scowl. "Thank you," he stated brusquely before walking away. 2 hours after takeoff, everything was proceeding as expected. The affluent passengers enjoyed champagne and gourmet meals. Julian was on his third glass of wine, vocally criticizing his business competitors. Chloe was uploading pictures of her food with captions about living her best life. Alara ate her modest meal quietly, jotting down notes in her book from time to time. A couple of passengers attempted to see what she was writing, but her script was tiny and filled with symbols they could not decipher. Then, at an altitude of 35,000 feet over the Arabian Sea, disaster struck. The aircraft was rocked by a violent shudder. It wasn't the mild turbulence travelers were accustomed to, but a sudden, jarring lurch that made everyone's heart stop. Drinks were spilled, laptops tumbled from tray tables, and a few people let out screams. "Ladies and gentlemen, your captain speaking," a voice announced over the intercom, strained with thinly veiled panic. "We are facing some technical issues. Please go back to your seats and secure your seat belts." The plane jolted again, more forcefully this time. The cabin lights flickered, and from the rear, a child started to weep. Flight attendants hurried down the aisles, their faces ashen, though they tried to keep their professional composure. Julian clutched his armrest so tightly his knuckles went pale. "What in the world is going on?" he yelled at Leo as the attendant rushed by. "Sir, I'm certain it's just some severe turbulence," Leo answered, his voice trembling. Alara calmly shut her notebook and peered out the window. The sky was perfectly clear, without a storm cloud in sight. This was not a weather event. Another violent shake followed, and this time, oxygen masks deployed from the ceiling. Panic rippled through the cabin like a contagion. Passengers were weeping, praying, and desperately trying to call their families. "Oh my God, we're all going to die." Chloe cried into her phone, attempting to reach her mother. Julian was yelling at the flight attendants, demanding explanations they couldn't provide. "I insist on speaking with the pilot. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who I am?" Amidst the turmoil, Alara sat perfectly still. She was attuned to something the others missed, the subtle shifts in the engine's hum, the way the aircraft was cutting through the air. Her experienced ear detected signs that filled her with dread. The plane wasn't just hitting turbulence. Something was gravely wrong with its navigation. She rose from her seat quietly and started toward the front of the aircraft. Julian seized her arm as she went by. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. "This is no time for a bathroom break." Ilara glanced down at his hand, then met his eyes with a firm stare. "Release me," she said in a low voice, but a quality in her tone made him let go instantly. She proceeded toward the cockpit, but Leo blocked her path. "You need to return to your seat right now. Passengers are not permitted in the cockpit area during an emergency." "The aircraft is flying in circles," Ilara stated evenly. "Your navigation system has failed, and you're burning through fuel at an alarming rate. You have perhaps 40 minutes before you're out of range of any airport." Leo stared at her, his mouth agape. "How do you? What are you saying?" Before Ilara could respond, the intercom crackled to life again. It was the co-pilot's voice, and he sounded petrified. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a total navigation system failure. We cannot currently pinpoint our location or set a course to the nearest airfield. We are declaring an emergency and requesting immediate assistance from air traffic control." The cabin erupted into a chorus of screams and sobs. Multiple passengers were in the throes of panic attacks. Julian was on his phone, shouting at someone about lawsuits. Ilara moved past Leo and knocked decisively on the cockpit door. "Go away," a stressed voice yelled from within. "No passengers allowed." "This is Shadow 7, Ilara called out distinctly. "I need to speak to your captain immediately." The noise in the cabin quieted slightly as people turned to look at her. What was Shadow 7? A long moment of silence came from the cockpit. Then, the door creaked open, and the co-pilot looked out, his forehead beaded with sweat. "What did you just say?" he whispered. "Shadow 7, Ilara reiterated. "I need to evaluate your navigation failure." The co-pilot's eyes grew wide. He quickly opened the door, ushered her inside, and shut it behind them. Inside the cockpit, Ilara entered a scene of controlled chaos. Captain Davies, a seasoned pilot with 25 years of flying under his belt, was hunched over the controls, pushing buttons and flipping switches with growing desperation. "Sir," the co-pilot said urgently, she said. "Shadow 7. Captain Davies looked up, his face pale and strained. When he saw Ilara, his expression transformed. "My God," he gasped. "Ilara Vance. We were told you were dead." Ilara went to the navigation console without asking. Her eyes darted across the instruments, absorbing data faster than most pilots could comprehend. "GPS is out, your backup is feeding you corrupted data, and the compass is spinning," she announced, her voice perfectly level. "Someone is jamming your systems." "Jamming?" the co-pilot questioned. "Who would jam a commercial airliner?" Ilara's fingers danced over the controls with expert speed. "Pirates," she stated plainly. "They force planes off their routes and demand ransom. But they made a mistake this time." She took out her notebook and turned to a page filled with calculations and coordinates. "I've been monitoring suspicious radio signals in this region for weeks. I know our precise location." Captain Davies stared at her. "How is that possible?" Ilara offered a faint smile. "Because I'm not really a passenger. I'm hunting the people who are trying to bring us down." Back in the cabin, the passengers' fear was escalating by the second. Julian was demanding that someone take action, while Chloe was live-streaming their potential demise on social media. "This is madness," Julian yelled. "Where are the pilots? Why is no one telling us anything?" An elderly gentleman in row 15, Dr. Ben Carter, attempted to soothe the others. "Panicking will not do any good," he said softly. "We must have faith in the crew." "Faith in them?" Chloe laughed hysterically. "They have no idea what they are doing. We're going to die because of their incompetence." A young mother named Maria was holding her 6-year-old daughter, Sophia, trying to protect her from the surrounding chaos. "Mommy, why is everyone yelling?" Sophia asked in a tiny voice. "It's just a bit of a bumpy ride, my love," Maria whispered, though tears streamed down her cheeks. Leo was trying to keep order, but he was as terrified as anyone. He had never encountered a situation like this in his 3 years as a flight attendant. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Ilara was performing miracles. Seated in the co-pilot's chair, she was manually calculating their position with techniques the regular flight crew had never witnessed. Her fingers flew over backup instruments that most pilots had forgotten were even there. We are 180 miles southeast of our intended flight path, she declared. The jamming signal originates from a vessel directly beneath us. They've been steering us toward international waters. But how do we find our way back? Captain Davies asked. Without GPS or navigation. Ilara retrieved what appeared to be an old-fashioned compass from her backpack. But this was no ordinary compass. It was a specialized military device immune to electronic jamming. Old-school navigation, she said, placing it on the console. Before satellites, before computers, pilots navigated using the stars, landmarks, and tools like this. She began a series of rapid calculations in her notebook, cross-referencing the compass with the sun's position and the few landmarks visible on the ground. Turn 15 degrees northwest, she instructed. Hold this altitude and decrease speed by 20%. Captain Davies paused. All his training screamed at him not to trust a passenger, regardless of her claims. Sir, the co-pilot urged, our fuel is reaching critical levels. If she's wrong. If I'm wrong, you crash regardless, Ilara stated bluntly. If I'm right, you live. It's your call. Captain Davies looked at Ilara's calm, assured face, then at his useless instruments. He made up his mind and banked the plane to the northwest. The passengers felt the change in direction and grew even more distressed. We're going the wrong way. Julian shouted, somehow certain he knew better than the flight crew. London is to the east. Why are we turning west? Leo tried to placate him, but Julian was beyond listening. I'm calling my attorney the moment we land, he threatened. This is criminal negligence. Ilara's voice came over the intercom, steady and composed. Passengers, this is a navigation specialist assisting your crew. We have located the source of our technical issues and are taking corrective measures. Please remain calm and seated. Who is that? Chloe whispered. I've never heard that voice. Dr. Carter, who had been listening intently, suddenly looked pensive. Shadow 7, he muttered to himself. I've heard that call sign before. In the cockpit, Ilara was weaving navigational magic. Using only her compass, the sun's position, and her deep knowledge of Middle Eastern geography, she was steering the massive aircraft toward safety. There, she said, pointing out the window. Do you see that island formation? That's the Socotra archipelago. We are precisely where I calculated. Captain Davies looked out and recognized the distinct shape of the islands. His instruments were dead, but his own eyes confirmed Ilara was correct. How did you know? He asked, astonished. Ilara smiled faintly. I've flown these waters more times than I can count. Just not in a passenger jet. She made another set of calculations. Turn 5 degrees north. We'll intercept the shipping lane and follow it to Muscat Airport. They have military-grade radar that can't be jammed. As the plane adjusted its course once more, something remarkable occurred. The jamming signal abruptly ceased. Their instruments blinked back to life, displaying the exact position Ilara had calculated by hand. My God, the co-pilot breathed. She was right to the mile. Captain Davies looked at Ilara with a new level of respect. Who are you, really? Ilara was silent for a moment, watching the instruments reboot. Someone who was supposed to be dead, she said at last. I was a military pilot, specializing in counter-terrorism operations in this area. My last mission went bad. My whole team was lost, and I was reported as deceased. She paused, her voice softening. I've been hunting the people responsible ever since. The same ones who just tried to take over your plane. The co-pilot stared at her. You've been living undercover for how long? 3 years, Ilara answered. 3 years of tracking piracy operations, collecting intelligence, trying to stop exactly what nearly happened today. Captain Davies shook his head in disbelief. And you just happened to be on our flight. Ilara's smile was grim. Not a coincidence. I was following intelligence that suggested they were targeting flights in this corridor. I booked this flight hoping to find more evidence. You used yourself as bait, the co-pilot realized. It was the only way to get close enough to thwart them. As they neared Muscat Airport, Ilara guided the plane through a flawless landing approach. The passengers, who had been gripped by terror for the last hour, finally started to unclench as the runway came into view. The plane touched down smoothly, and the cabin erupted in cheers and applause, but the passengers were clapping for the wrong people. Thank God for our skilled pilots, Julian declared loudly, suddenly full of courage now that they were safe. The crew saved our lives, Chloe posted on her social media, claiming credit for staying composed during the ordeal. Leo basked in the praise from passengers who had been shouting at him only minutes earlier. Ilara quietly packed her notebook and backpack. She had saved 298 lives, but to most of them, she was still just the plainly dressed woman from row 15. As the passengers readied to deplane, Dr. Carter came up to her. "Shadow 7, he said softly. "I was a military doctor in Afghanistan. I recall hearing about a pilot with that call sign who was lost in a classified operation." Ilara looked at him calmly. "Must have been someone else." Dr. Carter smiled with understanding. "Of course. But whoever that pilot was, they were a hero, and I have a feeling they still are." Ilara was among the last to exit the aircraft. As she walked by the cockpit, Captain Davies stopped her. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you file your report and go home to your family," Ilara said. "The people who tried to hijack your plane will be in custody within a week." "And you?" Ilara shouldered her backpack. "I have work to finish." She walked off the plane and vanished into the crowd at Muscat Airport. Most of the passengers never laid eyes on her again. Julian Croft gave several press interviews about his harrowing ordeal and how his leadership had helped steady the other passengers. He never mentioned Ilara. Chloe Daniels created a viral video about surviving a near-fatal crash, casting herself as a hero who helped others remain strong. She gained 1 million new followers. Leo was promoted and awarded a medal for his service during the emergency. He accepted the accolades, even though he knew he had done little more than panic. But Dr. Carter couldn't get the mysterious woman from row 15 out of his mind. Upon returning home, he did some digging, looking into old military files and declassified reports. What he uncovered made him understand just how close they had all come to catastrophe and how fortunate they were that Ilara Vance had been on their flight. Shadow 7 wasn't just any military pilot. She had been a member of an elite counterterrorism unit that specialized in thwarting hijackings and preventing aerial attacks. Her team had been killed while investigating a piracy syndicate in the Middle East, the very same one that had targeted Flight BA-847. For 3 years, she had operated alone, gathering intelligence and stopping attacks the public would never hear about. She had saved thousands of lives while living as a ghost, officially dead but very much alive and on the job. Dr. Carter tried to find her, but Ilara Vance had disappeared as if she had never existed. 6 months later, Julian Croft was perusing the financial news when he spotted a small headline: "International Piracy Ring Dismantled in Coordinated Raids." The article noted that a mysterious informant had supplied the critical intelligence that led to the arrest of over 30 individuals involved in hijacking commercial aircraft. Julian read the piece and felt an odd shiver. The dates and locations mentioned in the report all aligned with the area where his flight had been attacked. He found himself thinking about the quiet woman in row 15, the one he had so readily dismissed. But the thought was unsettling, so he pushed it away and returned to his important business. Chloe Daniels saw the same news story but failed to make the connection. She was too preoccupied with her flourishing social media career, built partly on her survival narrative, to notice boring news about criminals being apprehended. Leo also saw the story, and a memory surfaced that made his stomach churn with guilt. He recalled how he had treated the woman who had saved his life, and he knew he would likely never have the chance to apologize. But Dr. Carter smiled when he read the news. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to a hero the world would never acknowledge. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Dubai, Ilara Vance was packing another worn backpack. She had received information about a new terrorist threat, this one aimed at airports in Southeast Asia. She folded her gray sweater, the same one she had worn on Flight BA-847, and placed it neatly in her bag. The next day, she would board another plane, with another identity, to hunt another group of dangerous criminals. The passengers would see her and assume she was just another ordinary traveler. They would never suspect that their lives might rest on the quiet woman sitting somewhere in the economy section, watching, listening, and prepared to act when no one else could. As Ilara switched off the light in her apartment, she thought of the people from Flight BA-847. Julian, Chloe, and Leo would continue with their lives, likely never reflecting on how close they had come to death. The mother and daughter, Maria and Sophia, would have nightmares for a time but would eventually heal. Dr. Carter, however, would remember. He would tell his grandchildren about the enigmatic woman who saved his life, and perhaps they would grasp that heroes don't always appear heroic. Ilara stepped out into the Dubai night, just one more face in the crowd, carrying secrets that could fill volumes and skills that could save hundreds. The following morning, she was at Dubai International Airport, boarding Emirates Flight EK-384 to Singapore. She had received urgent intelligence that a new terrorist cell was plotting something catastrophic during the peak holiday travel period. This time, she was in economy class, seat 47K, wedged between a businessman reviewing financial documents and a young woman listening to music on expensive headphones. Ilara seemed even more out of place here, if that was possible. Her attire was the same. The grey sweater now sported a small coffee stain on the sleeve. Her jeans were more faded, and her sneakers squeaked more audibly. The businessman, Arthur Reed, glanced at her with mild irritation as she sat down. He was accustomed to flying business class, but his company had recently slashed travel expenses. Being crammed in economy with people like Ilara only soured his mood further. "Excuse me," he said to the flight attendant, an efficient-looking woman named Olivia. "Is there any chance I could be moved? I have important work to get done on this flight." Olivia surveyed the full cabin and shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but we are completely booked today." Arthur sighed with theatrical frustration and went back to his laptop, typing loudly to broadcast his importance. The young woman with the headphones, Isabel, rolled her eyes and increased the volume of her music. Ilara took out the same weathered notebook and began to read, just as she had on the previous flight. Her routine was identical, but this mission was entirely different. She wasn't hunting pirates this time. 3 rows ahead, in seat 44B, sat a man named Gregor Volkov. To the other passengers, he looked like a harmless computer programmer on his way to a tech conference in Singapore. He had a laptop bag and was dressed in typical programmer fashion, jeans, sneakers, and a rumpled button-down shirt. But Ilara knew the truth. Gregor Volkov was actually Dmitry Orlov, a former East German intelligence agent now selling his skills to the highest bidder. And at that moment, he was carrying something in his laptop bag capable of bringing down any commercial aircraft. Ilara had been tracking Orlov for months. He specialized in creating small, undetectable devices that could disrupt aircraft systems. Unlike the pirates who had attacked Flight BA-847, Orlov wasn't interested in ransom. He sought to inflict maximum destruction and terror. His plan was simple but horrifying. During the flight to Singapore, he would trigger a device that would methodically shut down the plane's systems one by one, first navigation, then communications, then life support. The aircraft would vanish from radar and plummet into the ocean, leaving no survivors and no trace. Orlov had selected this flight because it carried 387 passengers, including several prominent business leaders and government officials heading to an economic summit in Singapore. The crash would be attributed to mechanical failure, but the resulting terror and economic chaos would be enormous. Ilara checked her watch. The flight was due to depart in 20 minutes. Once airborne, she would have roughly 3 hours before Orlov activated his device. 3 hours to stop him without causing panic among nearly 400 passengers. The challenge was that she couldn't just confront him. Orlov was trained to detect surveillance and would immediately recognize her as a threat. If he felt trapped, he might activate his device prematurely, sealing the fate of everyone on board. As the plane taxied to the runway, Ilara closed her eyes and began to strategize. She had averted one aerial attack with superior navigation and knowledge. This time, she would need to be more inventive. The plane ascended smoothly into the clear morning sky over Dubai. Most passengers settled in for the 7-hour journey to Singapore, oblivious to the fact that their lives were hanging by a thread. Ilara waited for the seatbelt sign to switch off, then quietly got up and walked toward the lavatory. As she passed row 44, she feigned a stumble, her hand brushing against Orlov's shoulder. "Sorry," she muttered, continuing toward the back of the plane. Orlov looked up for a second, his eyes taking in Ilara's shabby clothes, before dismissing her as insignificant. He had no clue that she had just attached a tiny listening device to his shirt collar. Ilara spent the next hour in the rear galley, feigning airsickness while actually monitoring Orlov's conversations through a minuscule receiver concealed in her notebook. She learned that he intended to activate his device exactly 4 hours into the flight, when they would be over the middle of the Indian Ocean with no possibility of an emergency landing. She also uncovered something that sent a chill down her spine. Orlov was not acting alone. 2 more operatives were on the plane, seated in different sections. If she neutralized Orlov, the others could still execute the attack. Ilara went back to her seat and started to devise a new plan. She couldn't stop 3 terrorists simultaneously on her own. She needed assistance, but from whom? She observed the passengers around her. Arthur Reed was too self-centered and arrogant to be of any use. Isabel was young and would likely panic if she knew the truth. The flight attendants were well trained but not prepared to handle this type of threat. Then Ilara thought of Dr. Kata from Flight BA-847. He had recognized her call sign and had offered his help if she ever required it. She had turned down his offer then, but now she wished someone like him was on this flight. As if her thoughts had summoned him, she heard a familiar voice from the row behind her. "Excuse me, miss. Could you help me with my seatbelt? I'm having trouble with the clasp." Ilara turned and almost gasped. It was Major Kate Shaw, a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who had served with Ilara's unit years ago. Kate was in civilian attire and seemed to be traveling as a tourist, but Ilara knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Ilara quietly moved to assist Kate with her seatbelt, using the moment to whisper, "What are you doing here?" Kate smiled casually, but her eyes were grave. "Same as you, I imagine. We've been tracking Olaf for weeks. Intel suggested he would make a move during the holiday travel season." "There are 3 of them," Ilara whispered back. Kate's expression remained neutral, but Ilara saw her jaw clench slightly. "We know. Ivanov is in row 23 and Mikhailov is in row 67. But we didn't know you were on this flight." Ilara returned to her seat, her mind racing. Kate's presence changed everything. With 2 trained operatives working in tandem, they might actually be able to stop all 3 terrorists before any of them could activate their devices. Over the next hour, Ilara and Kate communicated through a series of subtle gestures that appeared as normal passenger interactions to any observer. They devised a plan to neutralize the 3 terrorists at the same time. The plan was hazardous and demanded flawless timing. Ilara would create a diversion that would capture the attention of all 3 terrorists simultaneously. While they were distracted by her, Kate would move to disable their devices and apprehend them. But first, they had to identify the exact nature of the devices they were up against. Ilara excused herself again and headed toward the front of the plane, this time passing by Ivanov in row 23. Ivanov was a thin, anxious-looking man who kept checking his watch every few minutes. As Ilara walked by, she pretended to trip, steadying herself on Ivanov's armrest. In that fleeting moment, she glanced inside his carry-on bag. What she saw made her blood run cold. Ivanov wasn't carrying an electronic device. He was carrying a small glass vial filled with what looked like a clear liquid. Ilara recognized it instantly. It was a binary chemical weapon that would become lethal when combined with a second component. Ilara continued to the front of the plane, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about crashing the aircraft. The terrorists intended to kill everyone on board with chemical agents, then crash the plane to obliterate the evidence. She made her way back to her seat, this time passing Mikhailov in row 67. Mikhailov was a large, brawny man who looked capable of overpowering most of the other passengers with ease. His bag was zipped, but Ilara could make out the outline of something rectangular and metallic inside. As she resumed her seat, Ilara felt the immense weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Nearly 400 innocent people were going to die unless she and Kate could stop 3 trained killers armed with chemical weapons and electronic devices. Arthur Reed looked up from his laptop as Ilara sat down. "You've been walking around a lot," he noted with annoyance. "Some of us are trying to work." Ilara ignored him and opened her notebook, feigning to read while actually reviewing the plan she and Kate had formulated. They had to act within the next hour, before the terrorists reached their activation time. The key was to generate enough confusion to prevent any of the 3 from communicating or deploying their weapons. Ilara had executed similar maneuvers during her military service, but never on a commercial flight filled with civilians. She checked her watch again. In 30 minutes, she would walk to the front of the plane and set off the fire alarm system. The ensuing chaos would provide Kate with the cover she needed to move against all 3 terrorists. But first, Ilara had to ensure the innocent passengers would be as safe as possible. She couldn't prevent panic, but she could try to mitigate casualties. Ilara stood up and walked to the lavatory again, this time getting the attention of Olivia, the flight attendant. "Excuse me," Ilara said quietly. "I think I saw smoke coming from the electronics bay near row 23. You might want to check on it." Olivia looked worried and immediately went toward row 23, where Ivanov was seated. This would place a flight attendant in a position to assist when the action began. Ilara returned to her seat and gave Kate a subtle hand signal. It was almost time. She thought about the passengers around her. Arthur with his important business deals. Isabel with her music. The families traveling for vacation. The elderly couples holding hands, all of them trusting that the plane would deliver them safely to their destination. Ilara had saved 298 people on Flight BA-847. Today, she would save 387 more, or die trying. She stood up one last time, her hand reaching for the small emergency device concealed in her backpack. In 60 seconds, this tranquil flight would become a battlefield. But unlike her fellow passengers, Elara was ready for war. As she moved toward the front of the plane, Elara caught Kate's eye one final time. Kate gave an almost imperceptible nod. They were both prepared. Elara Vance, officially deceased for 3 years but very much alive, was about to demonstrate once again that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear gray sweaters and sit in economy class, waiting for the moment when only they can save everyone else. That moment had come, and Elara was ready to answer the call.